Thank you for making the time, Mr. Solomon. How are you doing?
Doing quite well, at this beginning of 2022. Well, not so much a beginning anymore, but still early in the year.
Yeah, but it's an impressive resume, and I didn't read out everything that I was given. So, for those of us in the back, like myself, give us a little
Hmm.
overview of what you do and why you do it. Thanks.
That's a good question. I'm an organization development consultant. So, organization development is best described as planned organizational change. We work with companies to help them improve what they do and how they work in particular. And of course, that brings us squarely to people because organizations are literally legal entities. They only exist in paper, but the real organization is the people. So a lot of our work shows up in the area of leadership, management, development, and things of that nature, which brings the question of how people behave and, of course, how people change their behavior. Why I do it, you did have a second part to the question. Um, well, it's a couple things. Organizations are important to all of our lives. If you think about your place of worship, you think about your sporting organization, whatever it is, you think about your school, the place you go to work, the place you buy your groceries, those are all organizations, and their efficiency and effectiveness impacts us as customers, but also it impacts our lives in a very personal way. If you work for a company, the way that company operates influences and impacts the kind of life you have, the quality of life. So if we can make organizations better, we actually can make the world a better place.
And in terms of making that world a better place, looking at people, I want you to speak to the person who is broken-hearted because their New Year's resolution has already fallen by the wayside.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things about that, Dike, I don't make New Year's resolutions. I have not in many, many, many years for a number of reasons. I mean, one, time is continuous. So, this thing about the first of the year comes around and then something magically happens. Nothing magically happens on the first of the year, right? So, time just continues. What is more important, though, is commitment. And if I were to define that, I would say it is sustained action over time. So instead of, in my opinion, identifying these big things, I'm going to change my life come the 1st of January, I'm going to be a different person. People say, new year, new me. Well, okay, but it's really much better to identify small things along the way and make incremental changes. Changes, you tend to get more traction and more success that way.
And with that, I want to just take me to some of those incremental steps, please, in terms of the
Yeah.
process of changing human behavior.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you need something to shoot for. So I I say to people all the time, you can't change another person. If I were to put it a little more poetically, it would be the door of change has no handle on the outside. The handle is on the inside. So the individual has to turn that door. And I'm talking here about adult humans, even children to some extent, but let's deal with adult humans in this conversation. So the adult human has to make a decision if they want to be different. They want to have a different experience. They want to do something differently. Now, I understand we all struggle with something. Most people, most adult humans struggle with something. But the motivation to change, the desire to change has to come from the inside. That's where the handle to the door of change is. And so that is the start, understanding that there's something about me that I want to be different and understanding that no one is coming to save you. No one is going to come magically and tell you something magically that's going to fix your life or fix this element of your life. So it's a thing that I have to be motivated about, so motivated that I'm prepared to recognize there's another way, there's a better way, there's a better state that I would like to be in. And in order to be there, there's something that I have to do. Sure, someone might help, but no one is going to save you. This comes down to your actioning and your decision. And so if you're motivated enough and you're willing to take the first step, then, and the step doesn't have to be big, maybe I should say that. The step doesn't have to be this giant thing that, oh my goodness, I'll be a brand new person tomorrow. No, you can start with a little thing. I mean, if you think about how you get a degree, how you learn to cook a meal, how you make carnival costume, these big ones that go across the savannah stage, they start with small steps. So everything is like that. How do I lose weight if I wanted to? How do I become more healthy? Let's go with that. How do I change my diet, the way I consume food, my sleeping patterns? Start with small steps. And then be motivated enough to continue to take small steps. You'll get a lot further down the road taking small steps than trying to do these big magical things overnight.
And this reminds me of the African saying, how does one eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But in
Shouldn't be
terms
eating
of that
elephants though, but
behavior,
yes.
but in terms of that behavior though, sometimes when people say, I want to cut out this, I want to stop that, nature abhors a vacuum. So is it a
Yeah.
matter of behavior change or behavior exchange? How do we start to have these things happening concurrently so there isn't that vacuum inside of a person?
That really depends on individuals, Dike. I have met people who have gone what they call cold turkey. It's an American term, but sort of suddenly I stop it, whatever it is, and then I don't do it anymore. And I didn't need to replace it with something. And then there are others who do need to replace it with whatever that something is. So that really depends on the individual, but then that raises the issue of knowing yourself. Knowing who you are, how do you operate, what motivates you, what keeps you going, and so for some people, they need to fill that space with something. Critical though, don't replace one challenge or one addiction or one problem with another, because then you end up with another set of challenges and of course unintended consequences.
And you're saying this, Richard, and I'm thinking, is it that the cold turkey there isn't something that is happening extrinsically, is happening from outside, so I get a good habit from outside, or is it that work has already been put in? So in terms of, if we're thinking of like drugs that are harmful to the body, relationships that may have been irreparably damaged,
Yes.
somebody dealing with something for themselves, and they see all of that is happening, so it provides the impetus or the inspiration to say, okay, well, I don't need anything but to stop this. Is that one way you think?
I think it is, but I mean, you talk, for example, about drugs, and what we know about addictions, usually that's not how it works. Having good reason is not usually sufficient to overcome things that are so deeply rooted. Remember, the human brain produces its own drugs, and usually when we take actions, we are being rewarded internally by those actions. Somehow there's a reward, and those habits are very often harder to break. So usually knowing that this is not good enough for me is not sufficient for those kinds of habits, addictions, things like that, right? It's a good step, it's an important step, but it usually is not a sufficient step. Now, I think you said something critical there, and that is what we view, I am paraphrasing you, as we on the outside, that is, as cold turkey, may very well be there's been work taking place on the inside. Recognition, sick and tired of being sick and tired, looking for remedies, looking for ways out, how to be different. And so what we see as cold turkey might very well be the result of a long period of effort, internal effort that may have been taking place.
And I think this is a beautiful point to stick up in. We come back with more. No, we've been speaking about personal changes. When we come back, I want us to look at changes within an organization and the role of leadership. But we do that with Richard Solomon. When we return, stay with us. Come back. We are going in depth on leadership and organizational development with Richard Solomon. And Richard, one of the things, what are some of those things that we can take from an individual and build it out or scale it out so that we work towards an organization developing habits and cultures that we wanted to?
Yeah, that's a good question. The organization, as I said before, is a collection of people, and people's behavior in the organization really determines what that organization becomes ultimately. So there are organizations that are known for innovation. Well, that's because people behave in an innovative manner. There are organizations that are known for inefficiencies, and that is because enough people behave that way, and as a result, it becomes the way that the organization is. If you want to change an organization, then what you've got to overcome is the collective habit or the collective habits that exist. And very often in our business, we talk about culture, organizational culture. And just before the lunch time there, I was working with a company, and one of the phrases I use, and we hear this a lot in organizations, is that culture eats strategy for lunch. And culture is about values and, of course, behaviors, how people behave. And so if leaders want an organization to be different, what they really have to accomplish is getting the individuals to be different, to behave differently. And so that leads us to the question, how then does a leader or leaders get an organization, a group of people, to behave in a way that moves the organization in a different direction? And I'm asking myself that question as if you asked it, but that's what it brings us to. How does a leader get an organization or a group of people in an organization to move in a different direction? There are a bunch of things. I mean, one of them is that the leader, him or herself, needs to be clear about what change looks like. So very often we say, well, we need to change. Change to what? Do people have a place to go to, a image, a goal, a destination that they want to go to? That's important for them. Two, is the leader leading by example? It's one thing to say that you want people to be different, but are you demonstrating that difference? Three, are you making it easy for people to be different? So a moment ago, I talked about innovation. Innovation requires people to think differently, do things that are different to what they've done before. But if the organization, for example, punishes that, punishes those people who sort of think differently and do differently, then naturally people will want to protect themselves. So naturally, in protecting myself, I will stay within the lines, color within the proverbial lines, as it were. So those are just some things off the top that you could easily point to that leaders need to make sure are in place. Let me add a fourth: ensure that there are rewards for doing what is right or what we're trying to accomplish. And that might sound logical, but very often that's not the case. Because sometimes organizations are set up in a particular way and we're asking people to behave differently to that way. And there are pieces of the organization that are not aligned to where we want to go to. So the organization is sending mixed signals. I call that organizational schizophrenia.
A lot of schizophrenic running around the place, sir. But at the same time, in terms of those different methodologies and having a clear, articulated vision and providing most of those incremental steps that would get you from where you are to where you want to be. And I think most, not all, because there needs to be some input and buy-in and engagement with stakeholders. But I want to ask specifically the role of leaders and leadership during a time of disruption like this we're experiencing in the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, your leadership is truly tested in times like these, where, maybe I should say it this way, skilled mariners, calm sea doesn't make. Your leadership is tested, and really the trial by fire and your development as a leader comes in times when we're not sure where we're headed. And so the question is, what does a leader do? How do you lead in times where even some leaders and many leaders today are not sure where to go, how to do it? Well, it's a few things. I say start with the principles. What's important to the organization? Our people are important. Our customers, shareholders, our stakeholders are important. What do they need from us in this time? So let's look at COVID-19. Many organizations have said, we need to have our people healthy, and therefore, if they don't need to be out, then can they work from home? Well, some organizations did not have a plan for work from home and had to hastily put something together. That's not comfortable. But leaders who win in times like these are prepared to live in the uncomfortable. And I do this because I'm thinking of a surfer on a surfboard. It's not a stable, level situation, but leaders are prepared to think on their feet, look at these issues, and consult with their people. There is no requirement that leaders in today's world must have all the answers. There's no such requirement. And so leaders who do well tend to also consult with their people. See, change happens much better when you do it with people. And so if I were to bring it to COVID-19, listen, what do you prefer? What would work for you in a situation like this? This is not to suggest that as a leader, you could give to people everything that they ask for or suggest that they want. So it's not suggesting that at all. However, we know that if you listen to enough people, the wisdom increases. Because what we're dealing with now is this collective creative genius of the organization. So listening to people and listening to what are they saying and what are their challenges. Sometimes as a leader, we forget the challenges that we had when we were 4 steps down the ladder. And we make the assumption. Sometimes as leaders, we also don't listen to enough of the stakeholders. So gathering that information and making smart decisions and being prepared to change, because we're going to mess up. That's one of the things about leading in the unknown. When you're on the edge of change, things are going to go wrong. As a leader, being able to say, that wasn't the best decision. I wish I didn't make it. Let's look at how I can come back from this. How can we as an organization do differently?
And in terms of the 2 minutes that we have remaining, Richard, I want to allow you closing comments, but I also want to pose the question, in terms of dealing with the unknown, some people want to scurry back to the known as soon as possible. So what kind of paradigm shifts are you looking for from leaders? Or is it a matter as soon as we can go back to what we used to do, that's what we're going to do?
I love it. And I love that you use the name Scurry. Some people would know about Sniff, Scurry, Hem and Haw from Who Moved My Cheese, a very interesting reference. I don't know if that was the reference. The question is, does what we used to do, was that the best that we could have? And now that we've experienced something different, should we go back to what we had? For example, think about, I was just saying this to my office coordinator a minute ago. Think about having to drive me to a meeting, maybe an hour and a half, depending on the time of the day. But now all of those meetings are happening online. And as places begin to reopen, sure, we would be able to meet more regularly and more easily. But do I want to go back to that? Well, I say no, because that's a waste of time. We could do much better here online. For example, we could meet in this kind of a way. Otherwise, we would have been in studio together today. And I'm not against that. So it's an example to say that which we had, was it the best? And maybe it was at the time, but now that we've had a different experience, what do we then do? My suggestion is to say, are we getting better value with these new constructs, with these new ways of interacting, these different ways of interacting? And maybe it's not to go back to the old. Maybe it's not to stay with the new, but maybe it's to find a hybrid and to have the flexibility to move amongst the different approaches that we've explored and used over these last couple of years, the flexibility that has brought to us, so that we can have better effectiveness and efficiency down the road. And it's not just about efficiency. It's not just about cost, but it's also about convenience. It's about the individuals and their families and all of these pieces. These things have to be taken into account. So whether you scurry back to the past,
we want to thank you for raising these things and dropping some gems there. And the door to change has no handle on the outside, I think, is something that I'm going to have within eye shot all the time. But Richard Solomon, thank you so much for your time and those jewels that you have dropped. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you for joining us.